All right, we're going to get started. Hi, you made it. Great. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I'm going to eat a few more bites like at a break. We'll take maybe a 10-minute break for bathroom break or something. Somebody needs in. Somebody's stuck. Carol. Anyway, I'm glad you came tonight. I'm very grateful, especially to Diana for all the feast that we have, and Mickey made some food, and I don't know anybody else who was involved making, but anyway, thank you. And are we live, Hannah? Can we do it? Yes. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you send your Holy Spirit to teach us. Not only that, the Holy Spirit and you and Yeshua, the three of you live in us, which is amazing to me to think about. And we thank you that you want us to understand and learn and apply even more than we do. So we ask that your Spirit would teach us. You said your Spirit was sent to be our teacher, and we need to be taught, whether we've seen Ruth one time or never or 1,000 times. There's always more. Thank you, Father, that your word is alive and active and works on us from the inside out. So, Father, you know what each of us here needs to gain from what we will hear from this teaching, and impress it upon our hearts and help us to be encouraged. And if there's something new we need to incorporate in our lives, whatever you want us to learn, Father, may you have complete reign in our lives. And we thank you for the possibility of doing that here, and we pray this B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu, in the name of Jesus, our Messiah. Amen. So, the title of the book, Ruth, of course, is the main character, and basically the root meaning, or the meaning of Ruth, can mean refreshment. We just had refreshments, right? You know, opening the windows is refreshing. So Ruth is refreshing. Another meaning is comfort, but basically friendship. So let's see. Her name appears 12 times in the book, and then it's in one other book, of course, in the genealogy through Joseph in Matthew. And how many times, this is a trick question, I'm telling you right away, how many times is Ruth called Jewish, a Jew? Ruth the Jew, Ruth the Jewess, Ruth the woman who converted to Judaism. Correct, 0, exactly. She is called a Moabitess. Can you become a Jew? You cannot. Just like I say, I may love Chinese food, but I cannot wake up Chinese tomorrow. If I try really, really hard, I just can't do it, okay? Can't. Jewish people like Chinese food because they used to be the only ones open on Sundays because the Buddhists didn't care, so we would go to, all Jewish people love Chinese food, basically. So, yes, remember. Now, if you're having an argument with somebody who converted to Judaism, okay, they have bigger issues. Don't fight over that. You know, they need to know Jesus. So don't get into it with them. But just remember, you don't become a Jew. So what is the other book in the Hebrew Scriptures that's named after somebody who's not Jewish? Her name was Hadassah. It was Hebrew. And actually, we're on the verge of celebrating that holiday in Esther, because tomorrow night starts the holiday of Purim at sunset, but nobody knows. Well, some people say this was written before there were Jews, so it's a really old one. 3 letters. Job. Yeah. You mentioned Esther, Sky. Let's compare Esther and Ruth. Why? Well, it's interesting, those two books. They have interesting comparisons and contrasts. Ruth is not Jewish, she's Gentile. We just said Esther is. Ruth was living around Jewish people, and Esther was living around non-Jewish people in Persia. Ruth married Esther is the same. Also a story of faith and blessing. Ruth teaches us about the sovereignty of God, and Esther teaches us about God's provision, or what we call the providence of God. And the author is talking about things that happened 100 to 150 years before. So the author was not an eyewitness. We don't know exactly who wrote Ruth. But it was written sometime after the period of the Judges. Now, the story takes place during the period of the Judges. If you know anything about the Judges, you know there was Jewish people were not following God, and God sent an oppressor, and then they cried out to God, God, help, help, and God sent somebody, and because they repented, and then things started going well, and then they slipped back, and God started going bad again, and then the cycle goes on. I forgot 7 times. It's many cycles. It's just like this. And in general, the general thing about Judges is everybody did what was right in their own eyes. It was all crazy. Not very good times. But talking again about the date, the author has to explain about a particular custom. We'll look at this next Wednesday, because the custom didn't even exist anymore. Hannah, is this at a good level for the mic? Is that a good level? Okay. And this book is really important because it gives us the genealogy, part of the genealogy of Jesus that's nowhere else. So the book of Ruth is super important for that. And we know that Ruth was sometime after, it was written down after David was already king. So David was Ruth's great-grandson. And but it was written that much later. So sometime in the time of David, but before Solomon was born, that's the best ideas. So the most important thing is it's written, let's say, around the time of David. David's about 1000 BC. And of course, it's in not the section of the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses. It's not in the section of the prophets. It's in the other section called the writings. And we always read Ruth. For those of you who are here on Sunday, I talked about the spring Jewish holidays, and the holiday of Pentecost is when we read this book in synagogue. And why? Well, we'll hear about do you remember what I said we were harvesting at the time of Pentecost? Not the barley that grows fast. What takes longer to grow? Wheat. So this is at the time of the wheat harvest that we read that. And it introduces us to Samuel. And again, then we know more about King David, because there's a few generations that wouldn't be mentioned in any other book if we didn't have this one. And there was a famine going on, and a drought, of course. And there's a famine in one place in Judges at the time of Gideon. And let's compare now the book of Ruth with all the rest of the time of Judges, where I said these cycles were going on. Judges, there was a lot of immorality. And in Ruth, we see fidelity. We see purity. We see righteousness. In the Judges, we see problems with idolatry. And in Ruth, we see worship of the one God, even by somebody who wasn't Jewish, which is pretty cool. In Judges, it's a time of decline and disloyalty. And yet, in Ruth, we see Ruth who's so devoted to Naomi, and it's really heartening. Judges is a time about lust, and Ruth is about love, a special kind of love called chesed, which I'll talk about later. It's my very favorite word in Hebrew. Judges is all about wars. This war and that war and that war. There are no wars in Ruth. It's a time of peace. In Judges, we read a lot of cruelty. And in Ruth, we read about this chesed, this special kindness, or loving kindness sometimes is the translation of that. And in Judges, we see that I remember I said these cycles and disobedience, and God sends an oppressor and causes judgment. Well, in Ruth, we see that obedience leads to blessings. So very different. It's a very big contrast between the rest of Judges and this gem, which is Ruth. And Judges talks a lot about a dark period, and Ruth is really about spiritual light. Now, there's a lot about the Moabites. Moab is where, if you think of Israel, the country of Israel, and then east of Israel is Jordan today, and Ammon is in the north, or Ammon is the capital, and then in the middle is Moab, and in the south is a place called Edom. And so the Moabites are in the middle there, and they are children of Lot, whose daughter committed incest with him, and Moab means of my father. That's how she had children, and they became important during the Exodus of Israel. And so the southern kingdom, Edom, said, "You're not coming in here with all those people. You're not going to even come through." Moab said, "Come on in, but we're going to curse you." Balaam was hired to curse all those people, but they didn't forbid them to come in. And God said, you can't fight these people, the Moabites. He never wants Israel to fight Moab. It's interesting, because he said that territory God gave them. You know, what merit do they have? I don't know, but God loves non-Jewish people, let's remember. And you know, early in King David's, kingship, he had good relationships there. When he was hiding from Saul, he sent his family there to be safe. So Moab wasn't such a bad place, even though their chief god was Chemosh, which involved child sacrifice, which is horrible, which we don't want to think about. There's something called the levirate marriage, which you can read all about it in Deuteronomy 25, but if a woman is married to a man and he dies before she has children, a son, then his brother is supposed to give her children. And it's just a way to continue the family legacy so he doesn't lose all his land. And we're going to find this in the story, even though it's not following the very strictest laws about that. Because Naomi later says, am I going to make more baby boys that you can marry later? She's not depending on another brother of her dead husband to do it. So it's not followed perfectly, but it's still in there. And the idea of a Gaal or a Goel, which means a kinsman redeemer, is really important in this. And so there's another time that you need to be redeemed. Let's say our family is really poor and we don't have enough money. We can't think of this these days, but maybe my dad would say, okay, Jackie, we're going to sell you to those people to get some money. And you go work for them and you're a slave. Now, can somebody buy me back? Well, they can, but it can't just be one of you. It's got to be somebody in my family who does it. There's got to be a kinsman. Kinsman means somebody in the family. Kin is family, right? Somebody from the family who redeems you. And, or if you sell property because you're really poor, you can redeem that too. So you can redeem property, you can redeem people back then. And what does that kinsman redeemer need to be? And we'll see that Jesus is all of these for us. In this case, a kinsman was to redeem his brother and his brother's inheritance, if he could do that. He was also, if there was a murder in the family, that would be the one who would avenge that blood. We called that a blood avenger. And they would be allowed to pursue that person and make sure they were killed if there's a murder of a family member. I'm not saying Jesus did that. I'm just saying these are different roles that the kinsman redeemer did. And also raise up a successor. Let's say, like I said, this woman's husband died, and that's the story that the Sadducees threw at Jesus, right? In the last week before after the triumphal entry, this woman's husband dies, and then there's a brother who marries her, and then he dies, and then his brother comes along, and who's going to be her husband in the next age. And there should have been a police inquest as to why she was killing all these men, right? But that wasn't what happened. But and Jesus says, no, it doesn't work that way. But that's what the kinsman redeemer does. It's a dialogue. Most of the book is just dialogue. It's 4 chapters, so we're going to have 4 sessions. And the important ideas that we find about God in this book are, I'm just going to name some. We learn his sovereignty, how God is sovereign, so his control over everything. We hear about his grace, because there's a lot of grace being offered in this book. Also judgment, because that's what happened with Naomi's husband and sons. There was judgment involved, why they died. We find out that Yahweh, or Jehovah, or the proper name of God, Lord with capital letters, L-O-R-D, he is really the God of Israel, and he provides, and he, especially his love, the chesed love. This chesed is a love, let's say when Sky and Justin got married. Did you get married here? Okay, so you declared your love for one another, and you made a vow. And you said, I pledge what I am to you. And that, and then you dedicated Ethan, right? So you as parents together showed your covenant love to him by saying, we want to raise this boy, in God's ways. And that's part of like a covenant that you made in front of all these people. Come and sit in the middle. It's great to have everybody in the center. Please, I'm so glad you came. Thanks for coming. Yeah. We left those chairs all bunched up where Diana is sitting, but because she made all the food, we'll let her do whatever she wants. So we see that this covenant love, this chesed, this deep, strong covenant love of God, we see it towards Ruth. We see Boaz towards Ruth. We're going to see all this strong love all throughout this book. And you know what? God cares about widows. My sister is a widow. I have a friend who just became a widow with Ariel Ministries. What we'll see is that that person who redeems has to be willing to do it. And if we think about Jesus, was he willing to redeem us? Yes, he was. We were in the slave market. We were slaves to sin. We weren't slaves because somebody sold us. We kind of jumped in ourselves and became slaves to sin, and he redeemed us out of that market and said, nope, not for sale anymore. I redeemed it. He was able to do it, yeah. And the Redeemer also has to be free themselves. And was Jesus free? Absolutely. And he was able to pay that price. It's very important to see Gentile salvation in the book of Ruth, how God cares about non-Jewish people. This is one of the themes of the book. And yes, we see, and concerning Israel, that God keeps his covenants to Israel. And of course, we see Jesus's lineage, so the covenant with David, King David. So once again, what is the purpose of the book? We have this link between the tribe of Judah. I grew up knowing that the Messiah would come from the tribe of Judah. But did I know how to connect Judah to David? Well, I wouldn't have been able to make the full connection without the book of Ruth, because Ruth has some names that no other book does, like I said. And we see that despite the disobedient time of the book of Judges, there was true faith, there was true love and obedience, and God had a remnant, a little part. When you think of if you sew and you have a bolt of fabric, there might be a remnant at the end you can buy for not much. It's just a small part of the bigger bolt that used to be much bigger. So God has a remnant. You are a remnant among those who live in Hawaii or maybe Mililani. Not everybody in Mililani loves Jesus, but you do, I hope. So you are a remnant, and you can be a remnant among Jewish people like me, or a remnant among Gentile people like you. And God's grace is for this remnant. And of course, his grace includes everybody, not just Jewish people. And it's great to know that not everybody was like the Canaanites, you know. They didn't all go that way. The rabbis say, why was this written? It does not contain laws about you can eat this, don't eat that, what do you do to be pure or impure. It doesn't say what's allowed, what's forbidden. The rabbis say it was written to tell us how great our reward is if we excel in deeds of kindness and love. Pretty cool. And I have friends, well, you would know her, Jackie Hager, who says, I want to be like Ruth. I adopt the God of Israel, and I want to be like Ruth. And it's beautiful. Of course, the key verses you might have heard is when Ruth says to Naomi, your God will be my God, and your people, my people. That's in chapter 1. We'll see that tonight. And later, of course, the last chapter is that genealogy part. So those are the two sections of the key verses. And like I said, that kinsman redeemer is a really important concept. And that chesed, I spell it C-H-E-S-E-D if you want to know how to spell it. It looks like chesed, but we don't say ch in Hebrew. So it's the, Dr. Fruchtenbaum says it's loyalty that comes from love and kindness towards someone you're responsible for. You're responsible for Ethan, you know, and you you know, are responsible to each other, you and your husband. So God is faithful in his business of loving and caring for his people with providence. And of course, Elimelech, the husband who dies, Naomi's husband, his family would have become extinct. But God saves that family and eventually brings King David out of that. And I'm going to talk about a Ruth and a David this Sunday morning, so in the Missions Minute. So come back to hear that. I won't tell you now. And so we see Ruth, this daughter-in-law, who is showing this special chesed love to her mother-in-law. We see Boaz showing that special love to Ruth. And, you know, there's, I'll just mention briefly, does everybody know the expression, Mr. So-and-so, Mr. whatchamacallit, Mr. whoever? I'm impressed. I'm reading through the book of Numbers. I just finished the book of Leviticus, and you see God's naming all these people, and he knows everybody's name. Until you get to the guy who says, nope, I'm not going to marry Ruth, and they just call him Mr. So-and-so. He's not important. His name is forgotten. And yet God wrote down the very names of all these other people that will we meet them? Some of them we won't. But those names are super important. But this guy gets forgotten. They call him Mr. So-and-so. Interesting. So if we look at chapter 1, verses 1 to 22, we have the background of all this story. And it starts out, and it came to pass when the judges judged. So, yeah, there's the proof. That's when it happened. And that there was a famine in the land. And that famine, there was an invasion by an army, and they burned things, and probably they didn't have food. And so this man, Elimelech, says, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go where there's food. And we find out that Naomi is in Moab 10 years from the end of the famine before she says, I can go back. But if you look at the 2 chapters I tell Jewish people not to read before they go to bed at night, which are Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, these are 2 chapters. They have about 14 verses of blessings. If you obey, this. If you disobey, 40, 60 verses of curses. So I say don't read that at night, because it talks about your flesh falling off your bones. Basically, the Holocaust is in there, all the horrible stuff. And one of the curses is your land's not going to produce. Famine, there it is. That's what happened. These people were being judged. It was during the time of the judges, not that there was a good judge. It was It's probably during a bad judge time. And the people were being punished, basically, by God. And so do you say, okay, I want to escape punishment. I'm going to go run to this other place. That's not the thing to do. The thing to do is to submit to God. And they didn't do the right thing. But it says, a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab. So that's this central Jordan area here. And sojourn means to stay a little while. I'm here in Hawaii for a little while. I'm not here to live. My director said I can't live here. So he said before I came here the first time, Jackie, you are not going to live in Hawaii. And then he told me a second time, and he never tells me things twice, Jackie, you know you're not going to live there, because he had already visited. And he knew I had been to the Caribbean. And anyway, I loved certain things about here. And then finally told me a third time, Jackie, just remember you're not going to live there. And I landed in Kauai at night, and I smelled the air, and I said, wow, this smells like Haiti, where I was as a young adult in my 20s. And after a while I thought, I wonder if I could live here. And this time I said, can I really stay this long? 10 weeks in Hawaii? And my director said, well, it's a nice place to work. I said, yeah, it is. So I'm here for 10 weeks. So the verb, though, is to sojourn. I'm sojourning in Hawaii right now. It's for a short time. I'm not here to set up and buy a house and all that, okay? They're not my blood relatives. When it says he's in the fields of the country of Moab, all I'll just tell you is that it doesn't mean the whole area. It just means a little part. So again, that's the idea of sojourn, just a little place. And who went? Well, he and his wife Naomi and 2 sons. And so let's look at these family members in verse 2. The name of the man was Elimelech. Eli is one of God's names, my God. Eli means my God. Melech is king, so my God is king is what his name is. And Naomi means sweetness. My sweetness, actually. Naomi, my sweetness. My delight, my pleasantness, the sweet one, And his 2 sons did not have great names, so they must have been pretty not healthy. One was named Machlon, which means weak, weakly, a weakling. And the root of his name means to be sick. Not a great name. Probably didn't have a great childhood. I don't know how long it took before he got that name. And then Kilion means wasting, pining away. So another weakling, not great. And they were from Ephratah of Bethlehem, Judah. And so that was an old name for Bethlehem. Of course, Beit Lechem means house. Beit is house. Lechem is bread. And who came from Beit Lechem? We know that Yeshua did, Jesus did. So it's the house of bread, because they're coming, you'll see, during the barley harvest, and they're staying till the wheat harvest. So you can make bread from barley, you can make bread from wheat. It's the bread basket of Israel, okay? Beit Lechem. Bethlehem is the bread basket of Israel. And so it says they came into the country of Moab, and really it says the fields. So probably the only Jewish ones that we know about anyway. And it was wrong. And we know that Naomi is going to recognize that her husband dies and her sons both die because of God's judgment. They shouldn't have run during the drought. They should have stayed there, and God would have provided. And God spoke about Moab and said, don't include them in the commonwealth of Israel. You're not supposed to include them. And, if God had wanted them to move, God told Jacob he could go to Egypt, and he did. But God didn't tell them to move. And it says they continued there. We don't know how long. And then Elimelech dies in verse 3. We don't know exactly how long. But the rabbis say he died because he made everybody feel despair. Like, this is bad time, so I'm leaving. How would you feel if you were left behind and somebody said, well, it's not worth staying here anymore? He maybe, but that's a story the rabbis tell. And then it says Naomi was left and her 2 sons. And the 2 sons got married, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. And actually, they were allowed to marry Moabitess women, not like the Canaanites. The Canaanites, remember, are on the other side of the Jordan River over here, and they're not allowed to touch Canaanite women, but they weren't supposed to come into the Commonwealth or the Congregation of Israel until the 10th generation. And the first one's name was Orpah, not Oprah Winfrey, okay? Orpah, not Oprah. And Orpah means stiff-necked. Stiff-necked. I think of her with a long neck, like Ethiopian, like, I don't know, that's me. And we don't know which of the two guys she married, but Ruth means refreshment. Very different than stiff-necked, right? And they dwelt there about 10 years. So we're going to get an idea of how old Ruth is eventually. They stayed there, obviously, 10 years are a long time. And exile was considered a judgment of God. And now another judgment, not true today, not true today, not true today, is if you don't have children, that was a judgment from God. Not true today. That was under the law of Moses. That was the Jewish people, because they were supposed to build a nation. And if you didn't have children, that was a judgment from God, but it's not true today. Okay? It's Mosaic covenant only. That's it. The two sons die, and now we got 3 widows together. And that's also seen as a judgment from God. And the fact they were sickly kind of looking, maybe they died of natural causes, we don't know. But we only have the woman Naomi and these 2 daughters-in-law. She's got no sons to help her survive. The status of a widow was not great. And that's why Naomi said, go home, find new husbands, it's okay. Even though the law of Moses, these were Moabite women, they weren't under the law of Moses. God provides protection for widows, but they weren't under the law of Moses. And God defends widows. I wanted to grab a couple verses here for you from Psalms, if you want to look it up with me. I didn't print it out. Look up Psalm 68, verse 5, or I'll read it to you here. 68, 5. God says, God is a father of the fatherless. I'm fatherless now. I'm an orphan in a sense. My parents are both dead. And a judge for the widows is God in his holy habitation. So he cares for the widows. Another verse is Psalm 146. Psalm 146, verse 9. God says, the Lord protects the strangers. Remember, Ruth is a stranger. He supports the fatherless and the widow, but he thwarts the way of the wicked. You know, I love that we have a God like that. And of course, does anybody remember in what book do we see God protecting widows and orphans in the New Testament? Kind of later on in the New Testament? James. James talks about protecting the widows and orphans. Yeah. It's always God's heart. So in verse 6, they go back to Judah. She arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard how Jehovah had visited his people in giving them bread. So Jehovah had visited because before it was a time of judgment. This was a time of judgment, and now that judgment is over. And she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. So the word is to turn. Now the word is shuv. If I say I'm going to repent, it's I was going this way and I turn around. I do a 180. That's tshuva. I did tshuva 50 years ago when I believed in Jesus. When I was talking to a really religious Jewish woman who came to faith, she says, I will make my tshuva She will turn to God. And so this verb, now, did Orpah and Ruth turn back to God? They were never with God, so they turned toward God, but Naomi was the one who turned back, okay? That's the perspective it's from. And of course, it's the land of Judah. It's not the fields of Moab, it's the land. It's the real land that she was supposed to be in. And verse 8 and 9, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, each one return to you to your mother's house." Now, usually it says your father's house. Now, why does it say mother's house? Well, God didn't tell us. We don't know. I mean, the idea of house of your mother is more unusual, but it obviously had a special meaning. And Naomi was saying, find another husband, find security there. And of course, your mother's house is a place of security. And she says, "Jehovah deal kindly with you, as you have dealt kindly with the dead." Who is the dead? Well, their own husbands, right? "And with me." And that word kindness and kindly is that word chesed, that is based on a covenant. Like you, Sky, made up here, you know. You made a covenant. You had obligations to each other. And it's also used between God, who has a covenant with Israel. And she says, "Jehovah grant you," or, you know, Yahweh, it's the 4-letter Hebrew letter name of God, Yud, He, Vav, He, the 4 Hebrew letters, "that you may find rest." Now, are they in Israel when she says that? No, but God is the God of Moab, too. I mean, they may not have been worshiping him there, but God's the God of every place. So you can call on God from wherever you are, of course, even way out in Hawaii, of course. Because they were loyal to their husbands and to Naomi, God says, you know, Naomi says, you know, says a blessing over her, you know. And now what if they said, "Well, come with me and we'll go to Judah and you can find husbands"? She didn't think that was going to happen because there was racism, prejudice, and they probably would not have had happy lives. So she says, "Go home to your people. Don't come with me. Go home. And then you're going to end up poor if you can't find a husband. I'm poor. I'm poor. You're going to be poor too. You're not going to have rest, so just go home." So the important points in this section is that, yes, Ruth uses God's covenant name. The Yud, He, Vav, He name, the Jehovah name, is the name by which God signs his covenants. His covenants are signed with that name. So it's an important name. And so she still believes God is in charge and that he can help them. And says, you know, you've been good to me and God will be good to you. And, you know, because they were offering her grace. They were trying to take care of her. And then it says she kissed him, and the daughters, you know, lifted up their voices, verse 9, and they wept, and they said to her, "No, no, no, we'll go back with you and to your people." And Naomi said, "No, no. Are you going to go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, verse 11, that can be your husbands? Go back. Tshuva, go back. I'm too old to have a husband. Even if I had a husband and children and conceived tonight, you know, are you going to wait till they're grown up? No. Just go home. It grieves me a lot, but, you know, the hand of Jehovah is gone against me. She knows. What happened was not by chance. She knew it was judgment, that they left in famine when they should not have. You know, she said, you know, it's impossible. 3 impossible things. Am I still going to find a husband? Am I going to be able to produce a son? Are you going to wait? No. 3 strikes. Forget it. Go home. And we know you're going to have a hard time finding husbands where I live. So Orpah, now some people are upset with Orpah because she says, okay. It says they lift up their voices, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. The first, when Naomi kissed her daughters-in-law, they didn't take it as a final goodbye, like when I say goodbye when I leave Hawaii. But this is a kiss of farewell. Goodbye. I'm really leaving. But is it negative that Orpah was submitted to an older woman? the counsel of an older woman was go do that. Is that bad to obey the counsel of an older woman? No, it is not bad. Some people said, oh, she didn't have faith, she didn't this, she didn't that. No. That's not, you shouldn't look down on her. But it says Ruth clave. The word is dabak. In Hebrew, it's like super glue. Okay, it's stuck. Totally stuck. Would not let her go. Ruth said, I'm not letting you go. I'm super glued to you. And Orpah decided to become a wife. Ruth decided to become a daughter. Orpah did what was sensible, expected, and Ruth did the extraordinary and unexpected. And she said, verse 15, Naomi says, see, your sister-in-law's gone back unto her people and her God, because, and return you after your sister-in-law. And Ruth says, entreat me not. This is really a big passage in Ruth, to leave you and to return from following after you. And then she says, where you go, I will go. Sometimes people have those verses in weddings, that kind of strong commitment. Where you go, I go, and where you lodge or where you live, I will live. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. I mean, there is hardly a more moving commitment than this one. And she said, may Jehovah or God, again, the covenant-keeping God, do so much more to me and more also, if anything but death separates us. So I'd have to die for this not to happen. And of course, we know this is the first time Ruth opens her mouth. Orpah doesn't really say anything, or what she says isn't recorded anymore, but Ruth says something finally. And she talks about a social commitment, your people, and religious, your God is my God. And wow, very strong. And Naomi says in verse 18, when she saw she was determined to go with her, well, okay, she left off speaking with her. She didn't try to convince her anymore. And they arrive in Bethlehem, verse 19. And it was about a 75-mile journey on foot. 75 miles. I don't know how far you get in Oahu in 75 miles, but maybe pretty far. They had to go down a steep place, go down through a valley, and come up. So they had a drop of 4,500 feet to go down, and then they had to go up almost 4,000 feet back up from the Jordan River. So not easy. In verse 19, and it came to pass when they came to Bethlehem that the whole city was moved. It was humming, roaring, wow, did you hear? Look who's here. Naomi is back. And that kind of uproar and excitement is the same as when the Ark of the Covenant came into town. It was a big deal. And they said, is that her? That Naomi? And she said, nope, change my name. No, don't call me that. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter. And I'm not pleasant, now I'm a bitter woman. Because she lost her husband and her 2 sons. I mean, you're left with, in Yiddish we'd say bupkas, nothing at all. That's it. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. And the Almighty is El Shaddai. That's the big God. And it's used 48 times, that word El Shaddai. And it's used in the book of Job the most, because God in his sovereignty allowed all that to happen. And if God allowed that bitterness should come into my life, well, that's it. I can't do anything else. And then she gave a reason in verse 21. She says, I went out full. She had a husband, she had 2 sons. Not that she was wealthy, no, they were in poverty, it was famine. And then she said, why do you call me Naomi? Jehovah has testified against me. It's like he's afflicted me. Because God is just as supreme in Moab as he is in Israel here. And so Naomi returned. And Ruth the Jew, Ruth the Moabitess. There we go. Another time it says she's a Moabitess. And her daughter-in-law with her, who returned out of the country of Moab. So they came to Bethlehem when? Verse 22, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Remember, barley is harvested first. It's short, doesn't take as long. That's around April. And that sets the stage for what happened. So if they're talking barley, they're saying the famine's done. We can make bread. And so 3 important things that set the stage for the whole rest of the book. Ruth was a Moabitess. She was never called a Jew. Naomi, yes, is her mother-in-law. And Ruth goes back to Bethlehem with her. Now that word shuv, that word for turning, is used 12 times. And obviously, like I said, it's not Ruth who's turning back. She's never been there. But it's a turning toward God and the land and the people of God. And so, but we still got a problem. No food and no babies. Still got that problem. That's going to be resolved in the other chapters. But we see that chesed, that love, is starting to work. And God's going to reward it. And this is what I want you to take home, ladies. I mean, if nothing else. Bitter hopelessness can be the beginning of something good. I think of the story that Pastor Steve told us on Sunday about his life. He was bitter. He talked about being bitter. He was feeling hopeless, but it can be the beginning of something good. Some of you have seen me many times, so you've seen my literature many times. But if you have not seen it many times and you're interested, please take what's free over there at the table right at the entryway. One is called The Court is in Session and You Are the Judge. So, like, who is a Jew? Who is a Gentile? Who's a Christian? What's a Messianic Jew? That's an interesting one. How to Witness to Jewish People. There are a couple of copies on the Abrahamic Covenant, and I didn't bring up the one on Romans 9, 10, 11, so that's Israel, who Israel is, past, present, and future. So that's a good Bible study. So be sure to help yourself. So we're going to start and finish chapter 2 now, 23 verses. Here comes the hero. Boaz. Boaz is a strong man, and it says in verse 1, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, and who was, the rabbis say he was a member of the Sanhedrin. I don't know about that. And they also say he was about 80 years old. Now, I believe he was old, but 80, I don't know. That's stretching it a bit. But he was a mighty man of wealth. Mighty man. Think of when at Christmas we talk about, mighty God, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Mighty God. So when a person is called Mighty God, they don't put all the letters in Hebrew with that. They just leave 1 or 2 of the letters off, that he's mighty. But when you put all the letters together, yes, it's only God. But he was a mighty man of valor who was capable, efficient, a nice choice. He was strong in battle, probably, who was very important and learned in some particular field. And here we go. Here we are in Hawaii. Usually it had to do with military might. Somebody who was, officer material, let's say. Military service, somebody who was good, bearing arms, and he probably did heroic things. And so it says he was a mighty man of wealth. One word in his name means valor, and the other one means strength, and that's that warrior guy. So, he was quite the catch. Somebody can open up your jars for you. Okay. It's used of 2 of the judges, Gideon and Jephthah, had those words used of them, and also he was a wealthy landowner. He was very capable and, had a great lifestyle. But that word is actually strong. It's used of Ruth, too, in chapter 3, verse 11. We'll see that later. And, of course, like I said, in Isaiah 9:6, it's used of God. And he's from the family of Elimelech. So not from the woman, Naomi. He's from her husband's line. So sounds like it's starting to be a kinsman redeemer type, right? And Boaz means somebody who's strong. So he's that relative of her husband, man of valor, the right family, and quite the catch. And verse 2, Ruth, the Moabitess, not Ruth the Jewess, right? She's not called a Jew here either, said unto Naomi. So even though she has officially converted, if you will, she's never called a Jew. She is a proselyte. That's what the word proselyte means, somebody who converts to a particular religion. And she says, okay, let me go to the field. Ruth makes the offer because Naomi is older and she's going to look humiliated to go out in the field as a widow to have to do this. It's terrible. So she said, no, let me glean among the ears of grain, and after him whose sight I'll find favor. And, God's going to provide somehow. Because as we'll see this coming Sunday night, when you harvested your fields, let's say your field is this rectangle here, you never go all the way to the corner. You leave the corners so those people who are poor can get food from those corners at least. You never harvest the whole field. And but people who were landowners who were hostile or greedy, they might go all the way to the corner, but she was going to look for somebody who was friendly anyway. And, she didn't know the laws of Moses and the corners and all that. She just said, let me go try. And Naomi says, okay, go, my daughter. Now, does that mean Ruth was young, in her 20s? Well, she might have been 20 when she got married, and she's been there at least 10 years. She's at least in her 30s, at least. Some even said in her 40s. I'm not going to go that far. But the rabbis say she was 40 years old. I don't see the proof for that. And she went. And it says she came and gleaned in the field of the reapers. And, she just happened to stop on the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the right family. And in Hebrew it says she chanced. That's how chancy it all is. And it's just, humanly speaking, you'd go, what a quinky-dink. What a coincidence, but good luck. Well, no. She didn't know the owner. She didn't know anything. But by chance, she was in this field, the part that belonged to Boaz. But we know this was divine providence and that we don't control the events in our lives, but the hand of God is behind it. And so that she could meet this guy and lead to King David, pretty cool. And Boaz had to be a gracious man, and that he would see that she's a catch, and that he was from the right family, which, yeah, he was. And it says twice which family he's from. So God wants us to know he's the right guy. He's from the right family, stay tuned. And then Boaz asks about her, basically the day he sees her. I've heard of one love story since I've been here about somebody seeing somebody, and the day this woman is seen, the husband says, you're going to be my wife in his mind, and it happened. So here we go. Verse 4, Boaz arrives. Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said unto the reapers, Jehovah, God be with you. Now, how many landowners or factory owners are going to say, come to the factory and say, God be with you, and bless the people who work for him? Not too often, probably, but this is a really good guy. And they answered back, God be with you too, and God bless you. These are believers. These are people who care about God. So pretty cool. It's not some group of people who are going to attack Ruth and everything. And Boaz said to his servant, it says, who is she? Who's she there? And he calls her a na'ara, which in Hebrew means like the foreman, like somebody who was a supervisor, which, why, she wasn't a supervisor. She was a stranger who just arrived from a foreign place. Why did, he call her that? But we don't have the answer. We don't know. We just write down the words, right? And the servant that was set over the reaper said, she's the Moabitess, not Jew. She's the Moabitess damsel that came back with Naomi out of Moab, right? And she said, verse 7, let me glean, I pray you, and gather after the reapers. Now, I didn't know the system of harvesting. Today you've got big machines. I was even amazed recently. I thought cotton still had to be harvested by hand, but they got machines that do it. I didn't know that. I thought that's why cotton is so hard to find, but anyway. So she asked 3 things. Let me glean. That means, she would take what she gathers and takes it off someplace else to kind of stack it up over there. She makes a pile someplace in a different part, and then finally she puts all her piles together. And then she says, where do I want to do this? I want to follow the main harvesters. The reapers are the main harvesters, like the paid people who are paid to do this harvesting. I want to go right after them. Can I? And that's pretty unusual, because usually, they have to demonstrate. Most people are right-handed. So you've got somebody who's got a sickle, and usually when you want to cut something, most people being right-handed, they would use the cutting thing in their right hand, and they would gather the sheaves in their left hand. So they're cutting here, grabbing here, and dropping these certain things that other people tie up later, but they're cutting and grabbing, okay? That's how it works. And she says, I want to gather up whatever falls out of those, bunches. And those were, yes, it should fall in a bunch and somebody else comes and ties it up. But if anything kind of slips out, she said, I want that. Now that's pretty unusual, So instead of just getting the leftover, she said, I want good stuff, basically. That, in Yiddish, we say is chutzpah. That's nerve, And so, but the foreman, the guy was supervisor, he didn't have permission to do that. We had asked the chief honcho, the owner, we got to ask Boaz that, And we see, though, that she's been working hard even before Boaz comes. And the foreman did give her some kind of permission. And then Boaz gives her officially that permission. And it says, so she came, the worker, the supervisor says, and she's continued even from morning until now, and she's only gone into the resting house just a little bit. And so isn't that cool that Boaz didn't keep poor people from trying to get food? Boaz is generous. And Ruth did ask permission. She didn't just go barge in someplace. And then she really worked hard. She proved herself so that she could support her mother-in-law, who would have been too humiliated to do that work. And so obviously, Ruth was a pretty outstanding gal, because even the foreman had heard about her. She's the one who came back, right? She's the one who came back with Naomi. Now we see Boaz's grace. And then Boaz said unto Ruth, my daughter. Ooh, daughter. Now they go, okay. So he's a lot older, that's all we know, than she is. And actually, Naomi calls Ruth her daughter. He says, listen carefully, my daughter. Don't go to another field. Stay here. So the barley harvest is in April, March maybe, and you can stay all the way till the wheat harvest in May or June. So don't go here, stay by my maidens, watch where they go and go after them, the female servants. Stay close to them. You're not an employee, but you're a gleaner, but we've got the servants who are reaping, and then Ruth comes right after that, and after that come the people who are gleaning. Ruth should have been with that group. But no, she was allowed to come right after the paid servants, or the servants, maybe they weren't paid, but right after the main workers. That's a high position. And that's going to identify her with those workers, and maybe the rowdies aren't going to come close and attack her, and she'll get more. She's ahead of all the other gleaners. Wow. And Boaz says, I've told the young guys, keep their hands off of you. No guy can put his paws on you. You're safe. And when you're thirsty, you just go to those jars and go get something to drink. And verse 9, so she's so amazed, she falls on her face. Verse 10, she's just blown away. I made up an expression when I started working with Ariel. I said, I'm blown away blessed. Just, I see blessed on different cars around Hawaii here. Well, I made up the expression blown away blessed. I'm like, wow, God, falls face down and bows herself to the ground and says, how come you're doing this for me? And she should have been mistreated. She's a Moabitess. And, I'm a foreigner. And I'm a stranger. I'm an off-islander, let's say, And she makes puns, which I like puns, so anyway, I like this. She says, you've noticed the unnoticeable in Hebrew. She says, you've recognized the unrecognizable. In Hebrew, it's like that, kind of cool. She's not under a covenant, and yet she had no covenant privileges, and she says, I'm just a nothing. And verse 11, Boaz explains and said to her, it's been shown to me what you did for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. You left your father, you left your mother, you left the land of your nativity, and you came to a people you don't know anything about our culture and anything, and he blesses her. Verse 12, may Jehovah God, the covenant-keeping God, recompense your work. May he reward you, a full reward be given to you of Jehovah. So that's a second time it said, and the God of Israel, and this is a beautiful passage we've probably heard of, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, where did I get the best picture and the first picture ever of finding refuge under wings? At the Pali Lookout, because there were hens there with little bitty chicks. And I saw these, and the mother hen would call, and they'd all be hidden under these wings. And I thought, isn't that cool? I'd never seen that in my life, ever. I'm a city girl, right? I grew up in St. Louis. I'd never seen little chicks dive under a hen. It was like, and then they disappear. They're like perfectly protected. I mean, I love that image. I will never forget it. It was at the Pali Lookout. That's where I saw it. I'm sticking to it. So that's my story. But that is, we call that a zoomorphism. So it's taking some aspect of an animal, and comparing it to something a person would do. Because those chicks, nobody has to tell them. They just do it. Now, ladies, he just prayed for her. When you pray for somebody, are you ready to be an answer to your own prayer? He needs to be, because he's going to be the answer about that provision. So when you pray for somebody, you're accepting to maybe be the answer to that prayer. Just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Be ready to be that answer to prayer, ladies. Because he didn't know. He prayed that God would protect her. Did he know he was going to be the protector? But he was an obedient man, and he was willing. And then we see Ruth is so thankful to pieces. Verse 13. She says, oh, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. You've comforted me. You spoke nicely to me. Now, she uses a word where it says handmaid. There are different categories of servants in Hebrew society. Now, an amma is somebody who's pretty high up and maybe almost a concubine, and she was marriable. She was marriable. She could be chosen as a wife one day. She was really high up there on the servant ladder. Underneath that is called a shifa, and this was a slave girl who was usually a virgin and the lowest class, and she was just property. She wasn't big stuff at all, and she calls herself that low status shifa, and she says, you showed grace to me, a lowly nothing. And she knew she was low on the totem pole because she was from Moab. Even though I'm not one of the higher up amas. I'm not one of the higher up handmaids. So let's go on to the story, verse 14, and we see how Boaz answers his own prayer. And at mealtime, now this is the most romantic, well, I think it's the most romantic place in the whole Bible, okay? So, ladies, it's good for a ladies' conference, and we go, oh, so sweet. All right, so coming up here, verses 14 to 17, and at mealtime, Boaz says, come here, come here. Don't just eat over there with the gleaners and those who don't have much. Come over here. Eat of the bread. Now, I've never picked wheat or barley, or this was barley at the time, out of a field. But I guess you know that when I was asking Miki yesterday, what is the difference between brown rice and white rice? And she was telling me about the polishing process that makes brown rice white. And there's a hull, there's stuff on the outside. Now I remember living in Haiti, and these women would pound the wheat and they would get the chaff to come off. Well, a different way of getting the chaff to come off is put it in the fire and let it burn off. And so they would roast their, here we've got the sickle or the scythe and the handful. You can take your handful and put it in the fire, and to me that would all go up in smoke, and I'd call the fire department. Nathan to the rescue. But anyway, I guess you did it carefully, like when you're doing a marshmallow and you don't want it to go black, boom, you just want to brown it lightly. I guess there must be a technique to letting it just burn off enough, and then it just roasts it enough that it's good. But before you bite it, you dip it in something tasty. Like, Diana made this wonderful marinade for the cucumbers with shoyu and sugar and vinegar. Yeah. So she dipped the cucumbers in that, and it was yummy. And so they used some vinegar to kind of like dipping sauce. If you've got gyoza, you want dipping sauce, right? Yes. So dip this in the vinegar, and usually that vinegar, it's fermented, right? It's not like wine. You can't get drunk on vinegar, right? Because even those who had taken a Nazirite vow couldn't have vinegar. But remember, that's what they offered Jesus on the cross, remember? Was vinegar. But sometimes you would add olive oil to it. So now you got like salad dressing, sort of, and that's kind of a relish, which is almost like what we had tonight. And Ruth was sitting by the reapers. So, and it says that they handed out to her. I just have to tell you in Hebrew, all right? If you feed Autumn, for instance, and you want to feed her something wonderful, and you hand feed her something really good, here, have a piece of popcorn, and you pop it into her mouth, and she's like, crunch, 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 and she loves the popcorn, right? Boaz was hand feeding Ruth. Isn't that cool? That's the day he met her. Wowie zowie, you think he's got his eyes on her? Yeah, he does. Romance, ladies, romance. Yeah, because it says she was handed with one hand the food. Well, we know whose hand it was. Pretty cool. And it was not just enough for her. She was able to make a little, doggy bag for her mother-in-law and take it home. It was another meal. So lots there. And, pretty cool. It was a favorite to have to roast, carefully, I guess, those pieces of grain to get the chaff burned off, and then roast the grain, then crunch, crunch. Well, after you dip it, yeah. And it says she ate, and it was enough, and then she had leftovers. Yippee. So what does Boaz say, verse 15? More instructions. She got up, she's going to work some more, and let her not just be, okay, remember we've got the main harvesters, the reapers, then you usually have these other workers, and then you've got the gleaners way back here. She should have been there, and Boaz says, come up here with the main harvesters. Wowie zowie. Way up in the front line to get the best. Boaz said, let her glean even among the sheaves. This is the best spot. And that's pretty much never allowed, but he was smitten. And so he was going way beyond the rights of gleaners, way, way beyond. And yet she was humble, falling on her face. God, why are you doing all this for me? And I want to care for my mother-in-law. And she loves the God of Israel. And Boaz goes, yep, I'm going to give you extra. And they said, just, you gather up this stuff, just kind of leave some behind. Let her pick up the best. You're making a little bundle here, just leave some for her and let her pick that up. So you know how much she picked up? 30 pounds of barley. 30 pounds in one day. That's way beyond what a woman would normally get. That's a lot. And that was, the law of Moses did not require that at all. He went above and beyond. So it says she gleaned in the field until evening, and she beat out what she got, and she got an ephah, which was 30 pounds. That's Boaz through and through. He says, give her the best. He even helps her carry it home. Helps load it onto her. She took it up, went to the city, and her mother-in-law says, whoa, where did you go? And she brought her the goodie bag, the leftover bag, verse 18. And Naomi goes, excuse me, where did you work today? Where were you? Verse 19. And who did you work with? And blessed is that man. What a great guy he is. Wow, that's only possible if somebody did extra to help you get that. You should have been way behind down the line, getting the crumbs, and you got the best. Isn't that amazing? And Ruth says, well, the one I work with is Boaz. And she goes, whoa, God. Now remember, she thought she was judged by God. And maybe she thought that was the end of the story. Call me Mara. I'm bitter now. I'm not sweetness. I'm not anybody's sweetness anymore. Don't have a child. My husband's name is going to die because we never had a son who lived. And she says, blessed be he of Jehovah, who has not left off his kindness, his chesed, to the living. Who's the alive ones? Ruth and her. And to the dead, her husband and her sons. And Naomi said, that guy's, he's family. He's kin and a near kinsman. That's God. After I thought I was judged and punished and set aside, look what God just did. Wow. And Ruth the Jew, Moabitess, see, she's still called a Moabitess. Don't ever let somebody tell you they became a Jew. Or they'll say, I'm half Jewish. Well, tell me how you get to be half pregnant, and I'll tell you can be half Jewish. Doesn't work. It says, he said unto me, stay close to my servants, until I've harvested my whole crop, so not just barley, but wheat. And, she says, oh, good deal, go out with this guy. Don't go to any other field, stay there. You're going to be protected now. That's great, because these were the time of the judges. She could have been attacked. She could have been raped. She could have been all kinds of things. And it was the time of the judges. These were nasty people out there. And now we know Ruth is going to be protected. And also because maybe her skin color wasn't the same. And they were going to make fun of her because she was from Moab. You don't look like us. There could have been prejudice and racism and all this stuff. And she says, wow, you're going to be protected out there. Isn't that great? And so it says, verse 23, she stayed close to Boaz's maidens until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And wow. So that covered like 2 to 3 months. And guess who got to see each other every day? Boaz and Ruth. Maybe he just happened to go out to his field on a regular basis. I bet he did. And it says she stayed with her mother-in-law. She stuck close to her, right? That glue, she stayed super glued to her mother-in-law. And 3 main points to end tonight. She found chesed, Ruth found that loving kindness, that strong covenant love in the eyes of Boaz and in the eyes of God. and also because she was loyal to Naomi, and she was paid back by God and by man. Now, when do Boaz and Naomi meet in this chapter? Does Boaz ever meet Naomi, the mother-in-law? Nope, not at all. Ruth is the go-between. Ruth is the intermediary. So we still have the problem of what? They got food, but we don't have a baby, right? That childless problem is not solved yet, but Ruth is going to be involved in that. And thirdly, God is paying Ruth back for her strong covenant love to her mother-in-law. And what's the down payment? Boaz's generosity. That's the down payment. So you got to come back next week to get the second half, but I invite you to read chapters 3 and 4 to get a look ahead. Any questions or important comments to make to everybody, and I'll repeat them for those online. Yes, Corey. I see the question.
Okay, so I was wondering, because she looked different, what did the other harvesters think of her?
Okay, so Corey asked, because she looked different, what did the other harvesters think of her? We simply don't know. You asked lots of great questions, but we don't have all the answers. We do not know what the other harvesters thought, but they had to notice she's different. Obviously, obviously. It's like when I went to a main concert in Haiti, and everybody there was black except me. Do you think I looked different? I did. Definitely did. I was the stranger, and it was obvious, very clear. We don't know. We don't know. Any other questions, answerable or not?
Yeah, I have another question.
Go for it.
Now, in those days, did the women and the men not supposed to eat together, or?
I don't know enough about, that's a good question. Did women and men not eat together then? I think because it was public, it was probably allowed. This was the days of the judges, and they weren't, super scrupulous, maybe about the law at that time.
Like how
But a man cannot touch a woman. Why can a man not touch a woman? Any old woman. She might be having her period, and that would make him unclean, impure. You can't even rub up against. If I'm in Montreal and there are a lot of religious men, I have to make sure that I don't even brush up against a man. Now, I don't look like I'm having my period, okay? But you can make a man unclean, basically. So young men and young women will stay apart. Yeah.
Okay, and what does young mean?
Young. Well, I have a friend, I have a friend, Lisa Young, so you can ask her. And Clayton, I don't know what young means. I don't know if we have more information about young in that sense. But I know that Jewish people usually got married, girls maybe 16, 18 years old, men about 16, 18 years old. So I guess that's young. But I don't know until when you're still young. I'm forever young, so I don't know back then. I really don't know. You need a good book on Jewish culture, and that will satisfy your thirst. Yes, Guy.
I don't know if I have a question, but when Ruth first went out to the field to glean, she nor her mother nor Naomi knew that it belonged to Boaz, so they must have been kind of desperate at that time for food.
Yeah, when Ruth went to the field, I'm just repeating for the people online, she didn't know where she was going. They were in the town in Bethlehem, they were in Bethlehem, but she just maybe went close to where they were staying in a tent, or where were they? She didn't know where she was going or what belonged to whom. And it was part of the field. Maybe not the whole field was his, but it was his part of the field. Yeah, it's God directing her. Yeah, God's sovereign hand. We're not ever out from his sovereign care. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, Miki,
Sort of like
please.
didn't hear the meaning. So Naomi and her husband left to live in settled in Moab. So that was acceptable.
That was what?
Acceptable at the time.
No, it was not acceptable. Naomi and Elimelech left Israel when it was a time of punishment that God was imposing this famine on them. And they were not supposed to escape punishment by going to Moab, but they did. And they were judged there too. And Elimelech died, and his sons.
That's where they met. Son met Ruth.
Well, yeah, because Naomi went with her husband Elimelech and 2 sons, single guys. While the single guys are in Moab, they're like, hey, I want to get married. I want to, So they met, they didn't find Jewish women, they found Moabitess women, and they married them. Orpah.
God's sovereignty.
Well, God allowed it to happen. And God allowed Ruth to be brought into the commonwealth of Israel. Not only that, but be in Jesus' line. I mean, zowie, that's straight to the top. This woman who might have been looked down upon because she looked different, maybe her skin was different, maybe her face was different, and she gets a high honor. One of the few Gentile women in the line of Jesus. Wow. You just, ding, 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 ding. Got everything, God blessed her. But she earned it. She worked really hard. She was a hard-working young woman. Ruth, absolutely. Yeah.
Not necessarily Naomi and husband wasn't perfect Jewish couple. Yeah.
We don't know about Naomi's relationship or how her marriage was, but Corey asked an interesting question, ladies. You had to obey your husband then. So Elimelech says, we're picking up, we're going to Moab. Did she think, I'm not going? She couldn't not follow him. That's her husband. She can't be without a man in that world. But maybe she knew, we don't know, that it was disobedient to go there. So she knew it would be bad if she stayed, and she knew it would be bad if she went. But did God forget her? No. God did not. God still took care of her.
Ruth saw that.
We don't know what Ruth saw, but obviously in those 10 years that they were there, or more than 10 years probably, because, I bet Naomi told stories to Ruth and Orpah about her God. Because when Ruth makes her vow, she uses God's name. She doesn't use Hemash's name, the idolatrous God. She doesn't swear by that God. She swears by the God of Israel. So she's heard about him. And I don't think it was Veggie Tales. She heard something about who that God was. And she said, I'll swear by him. So she wanted to adopt that God. Pretty cool. So Naomi, even though she knew she was in trouble if she stayed, she was in trouble if she went, she still told her daughters-in-law about God. That's a faithful woman. We can choose to be faithful even in tough circumstances. It'll be great to see her in heaven. Yes.
Sometimes I wonder why they named these names.
Oh, we don't know these names, how they got named. Jacob, was holding on to Esau's heel, and so it's like, this is the one who's the heel holder. They just named him that. Like I said, I was supposed to, my grandpa's name was Jacob, and when a Jewish woman gets pregnant, at least a European descent, an Ashkenazi Jewish woman gets pregnant, they think about what they're going to name their baby, and it's not after somebody who's alive. Justin was telling me about all the different, how we got, Ethan's name and everything, and how Steve's name was this, and, all this. Well, we never name a baby after a person who's alive, ever. We always name the baby after someone who is gone, so we keep their memory alive. So when my mother was pregnant and not expecting to get pregnant at 40 at all, her father had already died, and she said, I want my father's name to live on. So I'm going to have a baby Jacob. And the plumbing came out all wrong when I appeared. So now what? For 8 days I had no name. Oh no, this is not a boy. Sorry. So finally they came up with Jackie, and that sort of worked. And my grandfather, I'll just tell you real quick and let you go, but my grandfather was born probably in the 1880s, 1890s, and he looked at an electric light and he says, I want to know how that works. I want to know what that is. And he eventually became an electrician, and he wired a whole town because he learned. And when he said that my mother said every Sunday he would take apart his Model T Ford and put it back together. He would take it apart, oil every part, shine it, grease it, whatever it needed, or clean it and put it back together. He was just bored. He'd put together and he'd take apart, put back together his Model T Ford. Now, jump ahead to when he was gone. I was alive. I was about 13, and we got our very first color TV. Now, they call me Gadget Girl. That's one of my nicknames. And other than Pickle Princess, I have several names, but anyway, make lots of pickles, used to. That's why I like those cucumbers. They're really good. I'm going to keep that recipe in my head. And when the color TV arrived, a big box, Daddy takes it out of the box, and I just set it up with the antenna and everything. And my mother put her hands on her waist. She said, you are my father. And I studied medical technology, because I like technology. So some of her dad got into me somehow. So let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we are so grateful for the exciting stories you give us. Thank you for the models you give us, those of obedience, those of disobedience. We can learn from everybody. Father, you want us to grow. So whatever it is that you impressed on the mind of each one of my sisters here, I pray that you would help her to experience it, to live it out, to build it into her life with your help. Thank you for your provision for us, even the meal we had tonight, this building, the wonderful furnishings in this building. Father, you are the great provider, and you are the one who shows grace. And most of all, you are the one who shows us chesed, that loving kindness, that covenant loving kindness, that deep covenant love through Yeshua, through what Jesus did for us, and even what we can do for each other. So help us to show that kind of love one to another that doesn't expect anything back, but gives and gives and gives. Thank you for Ruth, and what a beautiful example she is. Thank you that she got to know you, the God of Israel, and all of us here can too. So help us to follow you closer and to look to you to provide for us even through bitter experiences. We know that you have good things for us. And so be with each of us as we drive home, and we entrust ourselves to you in the name of Jesus and for his glory. Amen.